lot of times being in conservation can make you feel pretty lonely. When you start to see and observe things around your local area, you start to see maybe flooding or a lot of debris around rivers and streams and coastlines. It can be kind of weird, just you being aware of it, you telling people not really caring, your family and friends being like, well, what can we do? We can't do much. And it can feel very lonely. I've heard that a lot from, people in the audience and just people who are trying to get into conservation and they want to do something, but they may not have a marine biology background. They may have other jobs and they just can't dedicate their full time to it. And they just feel kind of lonesome and just being like, what can we really do? But they feel that, climate anxiety, ocean anxiety type thing. But there is ways that you can feel more of a community in and around the issues that you care about the most, like the environment. And that's joining a place like Surfrider. And Surfrider has been doing conservation advocacy work along the coastlines, not only for surfers, but for everybody and the entire community who lives in and around the coastline. And we are here to talk today with CEO Chad Nelsen of the 40th anniversary and where the Surfrider organization originated and how it's doing and where it's going to go in the future. We're going to talk all things policy and advocacy work and how they created the chapter network, how they have all these volunteers and how they make sure that everybody's trained up and feeling like a community, and some of the great things that they've done over the last 40 years and hopefully in 40 more. So we're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, it's a special one, folks. We got another interview, this time with CEO Chad Nelsen is back from Surfrider on the episode on how to protect the ocean to discuss the 40th anniversary of Surfrider. We're going to talk about the origins, how a few surfers decided to say, hey, you know what? We need to start looking at what's happening around us. We're starting to see some hot surfing spots go away, move away, get transformed into harbors and so forth, and water quality diminishing. We need to do something about it. We need to stand up as a community, as a surfing community. And that blossomed over the years, over the last 40 years, into a network of over 100,000 volunteers, 200 chapters, 80 full-time staff, and so many good things done for our coastlines, for the ocean, and for the communities that lie within them. And it's a lot of fun to be able to talk to Chad. Chad's been on the podcast a number of times. We've talked about his career, why he chose a PhD when he did, and when he did his PhD. We talked about that in another episode. Today, we focus solely on his 29 years growing as a biologist, as a person, into the adult he is now, going from an intern now as the CEO of one of the largest grassroots organizations in the world, and being able to talk about all the great things that he has been able to be a part of as a Surfrider and what they've been able to do, and how they feed off of the passion of the volunteers that make up the chapter network, as well as build programs because of that passion and be able to share it with other chapters and be able to do something on a larger scale. And at the beginning, I said, sometimes conservation can feel lonely. And even myself sitting in this office talking about oceans when I'm not doing an interview and doing a solo episode, a lot of the times I'm like, man, I wish I could really be out there and be a part of it. Well, being a part of Surfrider means being a part of the action, and you can be a part of the action in a lot of different ways. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes, in the description. It's volunteer.surfrider.org. You can join as a volunteer because it's one of the greatest organizations around, and it really listens to its volunteer. It trains its volunteers, and you can feel like you're doing something for the coastline in and around your area. And it's not only in the US, it's in Canada, it's in other places. So just go to that website, volunteers.surfrider.org. You can join as a volunteer. And for now, you can listen to Chad Nelsen talking about the wonderful things that's been happening over the last 40 years with Surfrider. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Chad, welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the 40th anniversary of Surfrider?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Andrew, for having me back. And these are exciting times for Surfrider.
Absolutely. Not only for Surfrider, for everybody who's not only involved in Surfrider, but who have been following Surfrider for a long time. It's not every day where you get an organization that hits 40 years and being around and doing amazing things. And today, Chad, you've been on the podcast before a number of times. We've gone over sort of your development through ocean science and ocean conservation, your PhD work and so forth. We've talked about your involvement in Surfrider here and there. And as the CEO and executive director, like that's a huge thing. But we haven't really talked about your evolution in Surfrider, because you've been around, I think it's almost 29 years since you started your internships and so forth. And, it's been around 40 years. So you've been there for a significant portion of over 50% of the time since Surfrider has been around. So we're going to get into sort of like where it started, how it's going, and then where you're headed into the future. So this is going to be a lot of fun. But just to give people a little bit of a refresher, can you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Chad Nelsen, and I'm the CEO of the Surfrider Foundation. Awesome.
And now, being the CEO and starting off where you started off, it's got to be an incredible journey. We've seen Surfrider be one of the largest, grassroots organizations, coastal organizations in the U.S. and maybe even the world. You've done some great things from a policy focus that we've covered on the podcast before. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's definitely it is a grassroots organization. It started off as a grassroots organization, but can we just start from the beginning and just be like, how did it all begin with Surfrider? How did this incredible organization become this incredible? Like, what's the founding story of it?
Yeah, no, it's a great story. And, it started the summer, August of 1984 is our sort of birthday and when we were founded. And, as is often the case, it was sort of a confluence of events.
Okay.
The surfers were focused on Malibu, First Point, Surfrider Beach, famous wave, the wave of Gidget, still like a world-class surf spot. That the water was constantly polluted, the inlet there was being managed without regard for surfing or coastal recreation, so they were frustrated about sort of surfers not having a role. Surf spots in California had been destroyed. Killer Dana, which is now a harbor, was an iconic, famous wave. People weren't listening to surfers, and as we were talking about before we got on here, there was also this negative stereotype. And the Olympics were in Los Angeles in 1984.
Yep, that's right.
And these three founders who I'll talk about, sort of saw athletes on the world stage at the Olympics, and were thinking, why aren't surfers sort of perceived in that way? And
right.
Interestingly enough, surfing is also now in the Olympics.
Yes, it is. Later. Yeah.
But and so they decided to. What they did is sort of what any good activist does: is they saw a problem, and they decided to do something about it. And so a guy named Glenn Henning, another guy named Tom Pratt, and a really highly regarded Malibu surfer, Lance Carson, were sort of the three guys that were credited with founding Surfrider in 1984 to try to improve surfing reputation, give surfers a voice in coastal management decisions, and ultimately sort of start protecting surf spots. And in the beginning, we'll talk about the evolution, but in the beginning, it was really about surfers trying to protect surf spots that were being destroyed. It was
right.
Somewhat myopic.
Yeah.
That said, they also had something which we don't do anymore called the Baja Assistance Program. A lot of surfers were going down to Baja, so it had a humanitarian arm also.
Okay.
And they were bringing supplies and stuff down to families in Baja. Again, part of that was to try to change the perception of surfers as being good stewards and good citizens, as opposed to sort of the negative stereotype.
Now that's what they did that with Surfrider. That was one of the first programs.
Yeah, it was like a program in the early days called the Baja Assistance Program.
Oh, that's so cool. And that's just, it's kind of cool because that's just impact. Here we're on your waves, we're surfing your waves, we're in your area. Here's some stuff that might help you out. Let's be a community. Yeah, I love that. I love that aspect. What would, when you have these three founders, and obviously there were probably part of a larger surfing community. You're not just a surfer by yourself. You usually surfer with some friends and maybe family, and then you build this community. What was the sort of the first perceptions of Surfrider by other surfers when that first started? Do you know?
That's a great question. I was 14 years old, so
Yeah.
I wasn't really. I was vaguely aware, but I wasn't in the mix. But I can generally sense that that there was a lot of excitement about it.
Yeah.
Surfer Magazine was supporting it. Yvon Chouinard, the infamous founder of Patagonia, was
Right.
an early financial supporter. There was a lot of goodwill, certainly in sort of the surf industry,
Yeah.
to support Surfrider, and I think there was a little bit of a sense of like, okay, it's about time.
Right.
And actually, we ended up developing this grassroots model that took a little while. It wasn't until 1993 that they built the chapter network. But part of that was because there was so much interest in other places, and the organization was so small. They were like, hey, we can't help you. However, if you want to start a chapter, we can bond together and work on these things together. So that was the origin of the chapter model.
And it's a difficult model to implement, right? Because it takes a lot of trust to other people, because it's you're using the Surfrider name, which at this point is it's almost 10 years at this point, where after they develop it, where they're developing a good name of doing some great things, having some impact on other communities, trying to save some iconic surf spots and stop development where these surf spots are, obviously, in preserving water quality. You build up this great name, and then you people are like, hey, we want to be a part of this. It's like, all right, like, let's think about this a little bit. Knowing surfers, though, that community feel, you're probably like, this is great. Let's try and figure this out. You said it took a while to develop this chapter model. Do you know what some of those challenges were? Because probably in and around near the beginning where you started, volunteering and stuff. But were you around at this point where they developed the chapter model? Was that a little bit before?
I wasn't around, and when I started, I think there was 24 chapters.
Okay.
So it was still relatively small. But what happened, which was interesting, is I think they were a couple interesting things. The guys who started Surfrider sort of admittedly didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
Oftentimes, big environmental nonprofits were started by a philanthropist, or the Kennedys started the Keepers, and so this was just a bunch of scrappy surfers who were tired of getting pushed around, and so in the beginning there was a lot of trials and tribulations, and so I think they were just trying to figure it out. Everyone had jobs, and what happened was there's a really kind of an iconic coastal conservationist in California named Mark Massara, who's a surfing lawyer.
Yes.
Who was an attorney for Surfrider in those early days, and he helped lead a lawsuit against a pulp mill in Humboldt.
Okay.
Which we won in 1992, and at the time it was the second largest Clean Water Act lawsuit in the country.
Wow.
And that put Surfrider on the map.
Yeah.
People were like, what? A bunch of surfers took on, this giant paper company and won.
Yeah.
Because they were dumping effluent in the bay at Humboldt Bay, and it was impacting the water quality in the surf. And
of course.
So that made national media. And that's when the phone started ringing. We've got problems in New Jersey. We've got problems in Florida. We've got problems in Texas. And, this staff of 5 at the time was like, I don't know what to do. And we had a board member named Gordon Lebetz. He was on the board of directors, and he was heavily involved in the Sierra Club. And so, Sierra Club has a chapter model also.
That's right.
So he said, hey, maybe it's time for Surfrider to start chapters. And so we did it, and I have to say, I didn't come up with it. I inherited it as an employee here, but I cannot tell you how effective it is.
Right.
I truly, now I've been at this for a long time. I've worked with just about every other conservation group in the country, And I really think this grassroots model, it's got its challenges, but when it works, it's so effective. And, so
why is it so effective?
I'm such a big believer. So I think for a number of reasons. One, I think that like matching the bottom up with the top down is a potent sort of formula. And that's because we have real people in communities who are passionate about these issues taking things on. Right. And that is a scale that we understand as humans, right? You talk about the country and 400 million people, like nobody really can wrap their head around what that means.
100%.
And so part of it, and and we're working with people who are experiencing the issues firsthand. And you can have a lot of influence at the local level at your city council meeting. It's a place where everyone has agency. And so, can you affect a federal law like the Inflation Reduction Act in DC? Well, you can try, and we do, right? You call and write and you talk to your representatives, but that's very different than going into your local city hall and talking to your city council members. So I think there's, and I get this from some of the big national groups. Sometimes they'll call in and they'll be like, I use this example. They'll be like, hey, do you guys know a fisherman?
Yeah, because you probably have one that's part of one of your chapters.
I'm like, yeah, what state, what town, what kind of fishing? Do you want a commercial guy, wreck guy, spear fishing? And so we're working with people who are like really in touch with what's going on. No, that's not true. I was down there yesterday and I saw it. So it's grounded in sort of reality. And so I think that's the power of the model. And it's a lot of work to,
of course,
support all these volunteers and activists. And whereas I think a lot of groups focus on scientists and economists and policy makers and lawyers, we spend a lot of our money, time, and energy on grassroots organizing because that's where where we invest to make this work.
Of course.
And all those other things are important too. And we work with a lot of those groups that are more sort of nationally focused. But I think there's a lot of power there, and then our challenge is the framework of the organization is how do we take that and scale it up to the state level, up to the federal level, and even in some cases in the international level.
Well, and here's what I love about it, just from looking outside in, is I hear from a lot of people, in sort of my work as a podcaster and building this community, where you hear a lot of people, it's like, I feel alone. Like I feel like I'm by myself. I see these things happening in my community, or I see it on a video, and I feel like I feel helpless. I just can't do it. And I think what the chapter model does, especially at Surfrider, is it gives you that collective home, where it's like, you may not be at the headquarters in California, but you might be in Florida, you might be in North Carolina, you might be in New Jersey, but you are sitting there, you are seeing something, and then you can go back and get resources from the chapter or from maybe headquarters and be like, hey, look, here's the problem that we're facing. Have you guys ever dealt with this before? Can we offer some solutions? And then you have these connections at not only the local level, but you also, and other local levels around the coastline, or if it's the same coast or different coast, you also have it at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level, where you can start to affect change. And so that person who felt so alone by just volunteering with Surfrider or another chapter, like you get this home and you get this support that you probably never had before. And I think that's where that benefit is. And then of course, like, you want that big voice at the top to say, hey, like federally or state wise, we need to make changes. Now you have this influence, because from like the name of it as an organization, you can walk in and just be like, well, we have this many volunteers who are all over the place.
People coming to us on this issue.
Yeah. It's such a powerful and effective model it could probably be scary to a lot of the anti-environmental policy people that we see, be like, oh God, here comes Surfrider. Like they've got some power.
So.
Well, I'm sure it has. I mean, over time, and we'll talk about it in just a sec. You've Surfrider as an organization, as a grassroots organization, has been able to do a lot of effective policy work.
Yep.
In collaboration with a lot of organizations. But you have a name, you have this good name, and you've worked hard to do that. But before we get into that, you mentioned that there are challenges that come through with building a chapter and just taking time to from the beginning to even install that model and figure out that model is working. What have been some of the major challenges that Surfrider has been able to overcome over the years, from the beginning and even to now?
Yeah, I think to fast forward to today, we have 200 chapters and clubs, up from 24, and well over 100,000 volunteers that participate with us every year.
That's amazing.
And so all those chapters are volunteer run. So anytime you're dealing with, I would argue we have, probably close to 1,000 what I call chapter leaders, people running the volunteer chapters, and then tens of thousands of volunteers volunteering. And so it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of herding cats because they're all volunteers. So
right.
I'm not in a position to tell them like what to do as their boss. I mean, we
Yeah.
have guidelines and structure, and it's orderly, and actually remarkably people, the network really stays on task and on mission. We don't spend a lot of time sort of self-correcting, but so just organizing that number of people, is a challenge, especially when they're all volunteers, and volunteering is challenging. So there's constantly trying to recruit new volunteers, trying to manage people so that they recruit and transition out before they get burned out. Nobody can be a volunteer forever.
No.
So in a healthy volunteer organization, you get in, you're excited, you do some things, you recruit other people, you're able to kind of take a back seat. They then recruit new people, and there's this ongoing healthy cycle of folks. So just training volunteers, retraining new volunteers, kind of trying to get everybody pointed in the same direction, have always been the challenges. And the other challenge is really kind of a good challenge is we've always struggled to keep up with the interest. So there's so much interest. The sort of volunteer capacity for good in the country is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It really speaks well to sort of humanity at a time when I think some people are, frustrated with that.
Yeah.
But, and so, we're always, we have 80 employees now. We used to have 5. And we're still trying to keep up with the amount of interest.
Yeah.
I want to start a chapter. I need help here. And so that's a good problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, we feel like we're always feeling like we're just tapping into the total capacity of what we could do with volunteers out there. The better you are at organizing, the more people want to be involved.
Well, that's it. And the more things you do, you're able to, accomplish too as an organization. The more people will be like, "Oh, Surfrider would be great." Plus, they're known as a grassroots organization, so they like to work with volunteers, and that's always wonderful. And as you grow, though, I think one of the challenges is like, how do you remain like the same? Because you got some great quality volunteers. Like they do some great work. And when we say volunteers, a lot of them have full-time jobs. And so they're doing this on top of that, right? And so it's a challenge for them to do, but that's like their hobby. That's what they want to do. They want to protect the environment in their area. So you have a lot of great quality volunteers. Is there like an onboarding process for each volunteer so that they know the mission, the values of the organization, so they stay true, so you can continue to, develop great quality volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And, before I started, I just want to say I've been at this for a long time, and I am always humbled by the people who are volunteering for Surfrider,
Yeah.
because you're right. These are people with jobs and families. In many cases, from high school kids to senior citizens, retirees, and everything in between. And they are doing the hard work of volunteering because they want to protect our ocean waves and beaches. So it is an extraordinary. I mean, I feel privileged to be working with such a extraordinary, group of people. And so, yeah, and we invest a lot of time and energy in that. So we have an online learning platform, with training that we're sort of developing. It used to be sort of fairly crude, and now it started in the early days as a Xeroxed hard copy book called the Activist Toolkit.
Love it.
Then it got online, and then at one point it was like an intranet, and now it's actually like a online learning management system with online courses.
Love it.
We do a lot of regional training. And then we have a network of regional managers of staff that are out supporting the chapters. And so part of our goal is to have one chapter manager, support regional manager for every 6 or 7 chapters.
Gotcha.
So we have staff that are everyday support to a region. So in California, we have 18 chapters, and we have 3 staff whose jobs, Southern, Central, and Northern, that are, supporting their chapters in their network.
Love it. I love that. And it's so interesting too, because there's so many different projects that must be going on at each individual chapter. Is there a common, what kind of projects are going on in some of these? I know there's so many, you don't have to name all of them, obviously, but can you just talk about a few of the major? Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So we really work on 5 issues. So clean water, beach access, plastic pollution, coast and climate, which is sort of flooding and development work, and then ocean conservation. That could range from the marine protected areas like the new Chumash National Marine Sanctuary to stopping bad things in the ocean like offshore drilling. So those 5 pillars are one organizing. Those are the issues that we focus on, and other issues like fisheries we don't.
Right.
So that's one way of kind of focusing the work, and those are issues that tend to be relevant to people on the coasts and coastal recreation.
Yeah.
And then we have a series of programs that are stewardship programs, or beach cleanups, ocean-friendly gardens, which is turning your landscape into a solution to pollution, ocean-friendly restaurants, helping restaurants get rid of plastics. We just launched ocean-friendly hotels and a climate action program, which is restoring coastal ecosystems. And so we build toolkits for all of those programs. Blue Water Task Force is another one. We do water quality monitoring. So those are a suite of everyday programs that are hands-on. This is also why I think the organization is attractive. You can roll up your sleeves and actually do something.
Yes.
In your community. And so we do those, and then we have advocacy campaigns at the local, state, and federal level on those 5 issues. And at any given day, there's about 140 of those that are active.
That's incredible. For all the stuff that goes, you talked about a bottom up, top down type of organization that works in both ways. Where you have this headquarters, and like you said, right now you have about 80 employees, and then you have this, volunteer network, hundreds of thousands of people. When you develop these programs, or you've been developing these programs over the years, are these programs from feedback of projects that are coming in, as well as sort of directions the organizations from an organizational standpoint wants to follow? How does that balance?
Yeah, in many ways, the chapter network, and we give you kind of referenced this earlier, we give the chapters a ton of autonomy.
Right.
So once you're a chartered chapter, you can pick a program or a campaign or an issue you choose based on what's relevant and important to your issue. There's no reason to be working on beach access if you don't have a beach access issue in your community. And
for sure,
beach access is the biggest issue in your community, and you come along and say, hey, let's talk about this marine protected area. No one's going to care.
Right.
And so we do give them a lot of autonomy to sort of pick and choose the issues that, are most relevant to them.
Right.
So that's a part of it. I'm forgetting the first part of your question that I went
Well,
off
just
on.
like in terms of like, I guess one of the things is, can you identify some of the projects that have come in that have really
Oh
contributed
yeah.
to
Sorry.
the
Yes.
overall
And
programs?
so they also experiment. And so it's like an R&D out in the field, right? So for example, we're trying to figure out how to get rid of all these single-use plastics in communities, and we're trying to pass laws and policies, and sort of our Huntington Beach chapter and our San Diego chapter and our Oahu chapter, we're like, hey, why aren't we asking restaurants to get rid of single-use plastics? And so, they started the Ocean Friendly Restaurants program,
Yeah.
and they started trading information, and they kind of figured out what worked. And
Yeah.
we were like, wow, this is cool. I think there's interest in this elsewhere. So we just sort of adopted it and nationalized it and standardized it, and then reissued it to the whole network. So a lot of it comes from the chapter network itself.
Love that.
And our chapters, this climate action program, which is restoring habitats. Cape Fear chapter was doing they'd collect Christmas trees after Christmas, and then in the spring they'd plant them in the dunes.
Cool.
And the Miami chapter is doing dune restoration, and folks up in Maine were doing wetland restoration, and so we were like, and then we had mangrove planting in Puerto Rico, and we're like, hey, a lot of chapters are actually doing coastal restoration work. This is great for resilience. Same thing. Let's aggregate this, start building some tools, and build a formal program. So a lot of it comes from the observing what the network's doing,
Yeah.
and then picking and choosing the ideas that seem to have some momentum and some impact. And kind of the same with the advocacy. We see local action happening in different places, and we're like, oh, look, a bunch of chapters are working on bag bans.
Right.
This was, a decade ago. Like, let's build a toolkit
Yeah.
and redistribute it. And so it really is a kind of, we have the fortune of like being able to observe the whole network.
Mm-hmm.
And these chapters are out there being social entrepreneurs, and we can kind of cherry pick the really good ideas.
And you can see what works and what doesn't. I love that.
Yeah.
I love
they're
that.
communicating, we're trying to do as much, connecting the network to communicate, so that they're sharing learnings, and we all are as we go. And, I want to make sure we get to it, but we're starting tomorrow. We're having a big 40th anniversary summit.
Oh, nice.
In Long Beach. And
that's awesome.
Bringing together 400 of our sort of top chapter leaders across the country, for exactly to celebrate 40 years, but also to, learn, share, and network across all these great people doing good work.
Well, and I think that's where this network comes through. You talk about 200 chapters across the country, in other countries sometimes, and each chapter has their own unique set of problems, and also unique set of attributes within the community of different people, different cultures. Like we even know within the states, there are different cultures within the states, in the different coastlines and so forth. So you probably have some unique problems within each of those chapters. But then you can take some of those programs like the single-use plastic bag ban and be like, okay, let's take this. This is actually a really good idea. We'll take the core of this, and we'll build the toolkit. We'll give it to to Florida from Washington or from San Francisco. Give it to Florida, see how they do. Okay,
Yep.
These are the challenges that they faced. Let's go back to the toolkit. Let's rejig it a little bit to lessons learned, and then let's hit it out to New Jersey, and then let's go to Hawaii, and so you have that at you're almost like a data center from the headquarters looking in, and your sort of your stations, your field stations are the chapters, and being able to work with them and going back and forth and be like, how do we support you? How can we help? What do you need from us, and what can you provide us that we can tell other chapters to do that would work? It's such a It's a good, like, that's where the model comes in, where it becomes such a
Yeah.
good feedback tool, right?
Yeah. No,
I love that.
and you're right. Like what makes sense on a Texas beach is different than an urban beach in Los Angeles or a
Yeah,
remote beach in Oregon or, the beaches of Florida. And so that's part of it, right? They
yeah,
have different cultural norms, different histories, different uses, different impacts.
yeah.
And so what makes sense in one place may or may not make any sense in the other, or we can find the common things that make sense
Yeah.
all over.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, over this 40 years, a lot of things have happened. Obviously, the
Yeah.
development of the network and the continued development and the growth of the organization, not only from a headquarters standpoint, but from a chapter standpoint. What have been some of the major wins that you remember over your 29 years working with Surfrider that people should know about Surfrider that they may not realize that you guys helped win or helped get something passed or helped institute certain things that people would maybe recognize that didn't know that Surfrider was a part of.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that question. It's funny because because of this grassroots nature and this sort of distributing the power, I think, we're always worried that people are like, oh, they're the like surfers who do the beach cleanups,
Yeah.
but there's not really a lot of impact beyond that.
Right.
And so, and we have had some significant impact. A couple things that stand out that I'm really proud of is, a few years back, we won a landmark Clean Water Act lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won and strengthened the Clean Water Act. Again, it started locally with a wastewater treatment issue in the county of Maui on Maui Island in Hawaii, and it had to do with sort of how far the Clean Water Act extends, sort of the reach of the Clean Water Act, and there was an argument that it was only sort of this quote unquote like sort of physical connection, and we were talking about a functional connection.
Right.
They were injecting sewage into the groundwater. It was seeping up through the ground and impacting coral reefs because the island is so porous.
Yep.
And we were like, hey, that means that the wastewater treatment's responsible for that pollution. We could see it through like dye plumes.
Right.
And they argued that wasn't because it was, went through the earth before it came out into the ocean. And so we won that, strengthened. They called it the Clean Water Act case of the century.
Wow.
The pundits.
Yeah.
So we're proud of that. In 2000, we passed a federal bill called the Beach Act.
Okay.
That standardized and funded water quality monitoring all across the country, recreational water quality monitoring. I like to think of it as the equivalent of like the grades in restaurants.
Right.
The
right.
A, B, C. Like,
yeah.
We now know when you go to a restaurant if they're up to par.
Yeah.
We should know the same about the ocean.
For sure.
If I go swimming, am I going to get sick or not?
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I think so.
We take it for granted, but that's a huge deal, right? Yeah.
So that would really, water quality monitoring prior to that was spotty and inconsistent, different standards. Here in our backyard, we stopped this massive toll road project that was going to destroy San Onofre State Park, the 5th most visited state park in California, and home to Trestles, arguably the best surf spot in the United States.
Gotcha.
It was a David and Goliath fight that we won. So we're pretty proud of that.
So how did that win happen? Like, you talk about David and Goliath type of fight. You're trying to save a surf spot. You're trying to save a state park that obviously it's like you said, it's the 5th most visited state park. Those are really effective tools to use to say, hey, this needs to be protected, and this toll road's gonna destroy that. But you're working against, maybe the government. You're working against, maybe it's a private company that's putting in these toll roads. There's some big things to go up against. How did you, if you could just say briefly, how did you win that battle?
Yeah, it was like a $500 million toll road in
huge,
traffic-laden Southern California, like the land of the car. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was our governor at the time. He was supportive of the project. We were told, don't take it on because you won't win. You know, and but it really is a testament to people power. The toll road authority had all the money. They had the political influence, but we had a huge number of people and worked in a very effective coalition. Parks Commission hearing, most attended in California history. You know, California Coastal Commission hearing, 2,500 people showed up. They had to move the venue 3 times to accommodate the crowd. And I called it the Woodstock of surfing conservation because there were like people in costume. It was celebratory music, costumes, and then the Commerce Department, which is above NOAA, which is above the Coastal Commission, held an appeal, and I think 3,500 people came out. And so the public overwhelmingly opposed the project, and sort of that massive movement of people, you know, overcame all of the sort of political and financial advantages that the road had. You know, so not only was it like I surfed there this morning, it's a magical, beautiful place. And it's got a wetland and it's full of birds and there's endangered species. I mean, it really is a gem. It's a largely intact watershed, so the water's clean after it rains. It's really just a place that shouldn't be spoiled. And so a real testament to what we can do if we all come together.
Well, and I think this goes to show that the chapter model works really well, because I'm sure a lot of the abilities to get people out in those types of numbers probably started from an internal email being like, hey, everybody, here's what's going on. This is what's at risk. So here we start off with Surfrider people, the chapters, the volunteers, and then they get their friends and their people that may not be in the know. And then all of a sudden they start to come out in droves. I think that like from an organizational point of view, when you talk about advocacy, that's where the power, it's in the people, right? It's in the ability for organizations, whether it's a coalition or not, to be able to get the number of people out that will be able to influence politicians and decision making. And I feel like that gets lost on people, right?
It absolutely does. And I think, I hear all the time, well, the system is corrupt. The money rules the day. It's the lobbyists, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that is true to some degree. And the sort of people who are destructive of the coast have more money and more power. However, we actually have all the people.
Right.
There's more people who want to visit the beach than people who want to destroy the beach. And we live in a democracy, lucky us. So if we choose to, we actually have a lot of control and agency over what the future looks like. We have the solutions to almost all of these problems. What we lack is public and political will, and political will comes from public will. So I think, if more people voice their opinion, more people get involved in local civics, more people vote, we can carry the day on any issue we want.
Yeah. You're right. That's the great motivational words, because I think a lot of people lose hope. And again, it's being isolated from other people who feel the same way. Your words probably reign true if I talk to any Surfrider supporter or Surfrider volunteer, to just be like, it's probably the same. They'll probably say the same thing. We can actually do something when we're part of a larger community. And let's be honest here, Chad, not everybody's a surfer that's part of a Surfrider organization, right?
Absolutely. No. Thank you. That's a good point. The origin of the organization was these surfers, and, sort of back to that origin story, the way I like to think of it is, in the beginning it was surfers trying to protect surf spots. And then they sort of connected with community members, and it became community members protecting their communities, right? So if you swim in the ocean, if you've got kids that play at the beach, if you walk your dog out the beach in the morning, or you like to swim, you had a stake in it. So it kind of expanded to communities and beyond surfers. And then I liked it, then it became kind of surfers protecting the ocean, and now that we know the role the ocean plays in climate change, it's really surfers and beachgoers and ocean enthusiasts trying to protect the planet.
It is.
So our mission has gone from, Malibu to the globe.
Yeah, and it happens so fast too. I think that's what the beauty is it starts local and you can affect global as you do local. I've been really onto this for a long time. We've been hearing it all our lives, as we grew up, we're like, okay, act local, think global, act locally. And people after a while, it seemed like people were like, no, that doesn't work. But now it really does. I think it's being a part of the right community and the right people who have the experience, who have the guidance, and like Surfrider is that community, or at least one of those major communities in the U.S. and even North America that people know. It's like, if I need guidance, I can go there. You talk about the learning tools that you have and the training tools that you have. It's all just incredible to be able to already have that develop. So when somebody comes in new, they're just like, okay, here we go. Like this is where I can be guided and really helped out. And then you can have that effective level. Now, Surfriders have also had like some major wins locally. Let's talk some of the federal wins with some of the coalitions that you've had, like, as a Surfrider, as an organization. Talked about the Clean Water, was it the Clean Water Act?
Yeah, that was like a Supreme Court win.
Yeah.
We helped pass the Beach Act.
Yeah, that's right.
Sort of playing defense. The Trump administration when they were in office, wanted to open all coasts of the United States to offshore drilling.
Yes.
And drilling in federal waters is an executive action through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. So that's also like a federal, effort. And so we opposed that. And again, it was interesting, right? Are you going to convince Trump and his administration not to do this? No. But we organized for example, in every community in South Carolina on the coast. Yeah. And we made an economic argument. Hey, business owner, restaurant, surf shop, kayak rental, hotel, you've got nothing to gain from these offshore platforms and everything to lose if there's a spill. Why would you support this? And they said, well, we don't. So we started passing resolutions at the local level, which don't have any teeth, but sent a strong signal. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, if you're the congressional rep for South Carolina and every coastal community in your district is opposed, it's real hard to support it. So again, we kind of had this, and by the end of the Trump administration, he was actually trying to pull Florida and the Carolinas out of his proposal because he was worried it was making him vulnerable in the election. Yeah. And that was, again, sort of like grassroots organizing at the base, scaling up to the federal level and having influence.
It's a huge thing, especially looking at, which administration is in charge federally, state-wise. There's a lot of things to do. I'm sure there's always something to do in the U.S. with so many things going on these days. Environment it's a big deal right now, should be a big deal right now in the upcoming or these election talks. But I find it interesting that you don't really hear a lot. Like in the debates of these upcoming elections, you haven't really heard a lot about climate change. You haven't really heard a lot about the environment. How do you talk to your volunteers, talk to your networks about the importance of this election in terms of this federal election, as well as there's a number of different elections going on in November in the U.S. How do you talk to your network of the importance of these elections and voting in terms of protecting the environment when the environment isn't really being talked about a lot on a sort of national scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to hold one time out. I've been sitting in this room and the lights just went off.
Saw
So
that,
let me just
yeah.
stand up.
No
get the
problem. There you
Oh,
go.
let me just get the light back on.
No problem.
Energy efficiency.
Yes. I love it.
Yeah, so for one thing, we have to be a little bit careful because we're a 501c3, so
Yeah.
we're like a nonpartisan organization.
Gotcha.
And I'll get to something interesting in a second, but and so we can't advocate for specific candidates,
Right.
and we can't be partisan in our actions. So we really are just encouraging people to get out and vote,
Right.
and without picking a side.
Gotcha.
But so if you're a local activist and you're actually advocating for local action at your city, you're paying attention to those city council members. You
True.
know about the ones that are with you or not with you, and so I think our network certainly gets the value of
Yeah.
elections and down ballot, right? They talk about this. Don't just vote for the president.
Right.
Vote for your federal reps, state reps, down to your
Yeah.
city council and your school board. And I really want to emphasize that is, because those local decision makers have a lot of power.
100%.
You think about something like the Clean Water Act, which regulates water pollution. We want to have things fishable and swimmable. Well, the Clean Water Act on paper in Washington, D.C. does nothing but set standards.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the behavior in your town, right? Is that business polluting water out of their factory? Are people hosing off their driveways and contributing to urban runoff? Does the car wash treat its water? So, at the end of the day, the water quality in your town is a cumulative impact of all these little things that are happening, not the Clean Water Act that's a piece of paper.
100%.
So we're encouraging everyone to vote. The largest party in America today is the did not vote party.
It's true, which is crazy
you
to
have
hear.
more people not voting than
Yeah.
voting for any of the one side or the other.
Yeah.
And again, it's arguably a relatively easy action to take.
Yep.
Harder in some places than others.
Yep.
So we just actually launched a Get Out the Vote campaign yesterday, and we partnered up with another organization called Protect Our Winters.
Oh, okay.
And Protect Our Winters is the winter and snow athletes. So it's sort of like the Surfrider of the mountains or the snow.
Gotcha.
And they're really focused on the impacts of climate change.
Yeah.
Shortening winters, and
Yep.
their favorite activity is at risk. But like Surfrider, they understand that, snowboarding and skiing is a luxury, but the impacts of climate change are serious for the globe. They're just using sort of their passion to advocate too. And so we partnered with them to say, hey, look, this is a really important election. Get out there and vote. And we know, make a plan to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That increases people's voting.
Yep.
And the other thing is get your friends to vote. Those guys have a saying that says, friends don't let friends not vote. So let's use peer pressure.
I love it.
And
100%.
Hey, did you vote? Let's make sure you voted.
Especially for that disenfranchised friends or those disenfranchised friends where they're just like, oh, it'll never make a difference, never make a difference. Like, you start making a difference when you get more and more people to vote. And, whichever way they decide to vote, that's when you make a difference. And you tell the people who, may be in power now that you may not like, no, I don't like what you did, or I don't like what you didn't do. And so I'm going to vote for the candidate that does, and I think that's what's important, is to pay attention. I think a lot of those users you mentioned, the recreational users of, skiing and snowboarding and surfing in the ocean and so forth, you know what you want because it affects you personally. And so I think you're right that you guys are knowledgeable on what the issues that are important to each user, and then you just let them know, like, what we need to vote for. And I think that's really important. And climate change is rearing its ugly head in the last few years, especially, where
Absolutely.
even this year, in Florida, where Category 3 hurricane followed a Category 4 hurricane in the Tampa region and the Gulf states, and a lot of damage and things like that. So, 40 years of great work and continuing to try and help, not only the people, the part of your volunteer network and your chapters, but also the country and the globe. What is Surfrider focused on in terms of the consequences of climate change that we've been seeing, and how to fight climate change, as well as other matters, talking about plastic pollution, talking about water quality, which they're all related, in some way, which makes it even more complex. So where do you see the organization as you lead it going through over the next, like, say, 10 years?
Yeah. We it's a good thing, I think, that we're like finding ourselves at the strongest point we've ever been as an organization, because I think the challenges are bigger than ever. So,
Right.
40 years ago, we were cleaning beaches, thinking plastic pollution was a local problem. Now we know it's a global ocean problem, and basically a global problem, right? It's in the atmosphere, it's in us. And same with climate change. 40 years ago, probably should have been, but wasn't a major topic. And I think I read a stat that 70% of Americans have felt some impact of climate change: fires, flooding, hurricanes, storms. And so we're, used to say climate change is coming, and now we know climate change is here.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the reason why there's a much wider recognition. So we definitely face some big problems. I'm somewhat optimistic about them because we can solve all of them. I think, for the most part, we have the solutions. We just need to build the public will. So we're doing our focus on climate change is really about the coasts, and focused on using the coast as a solution through nature-based solutions and coastal restoration. Blue carbon, our coastlines can suck a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and buffer us from the worst impacts of storms by building natural habitats. Mangroves and wetlands and dunes are great storm buffers.
Absolutely.
And on the other side of it, we're really trying to work with communities to figure out how to adapt, right? The sea level rise is coming no matter what we do. And we can either wait and armor the coast and see a lot of disaster, or we can start figuring out how to adapt for the sea level rise that's coming. So those are our really big focus areas for climate change. I think the manage retreat coastal adaptation thing is in its infancy, really, and we need to get on top of that. So we've got some good demonstration projects we're working on to show what that can look like. The best one is Surfers Point up in Ventura. If people Google Ventura C Street manage retreat, they'll just see a beautiful coastline that's been moved back from the coast, from the ocean and erosion. And then we're really trying to scale up our plastic pollution work. There's a global treaty right now to reduce plastic pollution, and we're working with our affiliates and other coalition partners to try to get the U.S. and other nations to, come up with a kind of like climate change, some realistic goals to eliminate plastic pollution. And another trend that's interesting, I feel like, is there's a real movement towards holding these big businesses accountable. The last week we sued Exxon.
Let me just drop it. We just sued them. Last week we just decided to do that. That's huge.
It is. So we sued Exxon for sort of disingenuous policies around recycling. Right. This is a connection between ocean and climate. Plastic's a fossil fuel.
I think it accounts for 30% of fossil fuel pollution.
And it's on the increase.
Yeah.
And so, as the number one supplier of the base materials for plastic pollution, they've been spending billions of dollars trying to convince us recycling works, and it doesn't. We're still at 5-6% recycling.
Yeah.
And so, you're seeing lawsuits against major fossil fuel companies for the impacts of climate change. So, we're passing these extended producer responsibility, which is, producer pays bills
Yes.
for plastic pollution. So there's a movement towards corporate accountability for these impacts. And I think that's appropriate.
Yep.
And, these major manufacturers of plastic, oil, and gas can choose to be responsible, or they're going to have to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with the amount of sort of disinformation they've been putting out and confusion they've been putting out over the last God knows how many decades.
Yeah, decades.
Right?
Yeah.
Like we're not talking about just like a social media campaign that happened yesterday. This has been ongoing and has been a huge impediment to climate action for decades, and something that we could have been installed a while ago, but they put corporate greed over and profits over action, and it could have been just as heralded for the action that they took back in the day. So I'm glad that that Surfrider is part of that. I'm glad that you're able to do that, and I think we're going to need to see that more in the future as well, with different companies, to just be like, look, you can't just start confusing the people and pitting us against each other of trying to do some good, because that's
just like
sort
big
of what
tobacco,
happened.
right? I mean, they're playing the same game, and the big tobacco is ultimately held accountable for hundreds of billions of dollars, and that money was used to significantly reduce smoking rates. So it's a good case study on what could happen to the polluters of the world.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, that those campaigns, those tobacco campaigns, like we see a lot of places where you can't smoke inside. I mean, remember when we grew up where you had like smoking and non-smoking sections in the same place, which was like, you think about it now, you're like, that's just ridiculous.
On the airplane.
On the airplane, yeah.
I mean, I flew to Germany in college, and there was one row in front of the smoking section on the airplane.
It's insane to think about. But again, it takes a lot of people to get together and focus in on certain aspects, and that's what you're able to do. That's what you've been able to do for the last 40 years. You're continuing to be able to do for the next 40 years and beyond. I really like what Surfriders have done, and so it's been a pleasure, Chad, to have you on and talk about these accolades. I always like to do this, especially with Surfrider, if and get our audience involved. If somebody wants to become a volunteer at Surfrider, how would you recommend they go about it?
Yeah, if you go to volunteer.surfrider.org, you can either sign up for your local chapter or actually see what volunteer activities are taking place. Perfect. This weekend probably be one of the only weekends of the year where there's not a lot going on, because they're all going to be in Long Beach with me.
Yes, that's right.
Celebrating, but almost every other weekend of the year, there's something going on out there. And so if you go to our website at surfrider.org, you can sort of zoom in and join your local chapter, find out what's going on locally.
Awesome. And one thing I forgot to ask, you said tomorrow is the beginning of the celebrations. 400 volunteer leaders are coming in. What can people expect from those celebrations and bringing people on and team building and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, this is really about sort of, strengthening and energizing this incredible network of people that are doing all this great work. So we've got some great inspirational speakers, a lot of training about organizing and campaigns, and and we're gonna have a good time doing it too.
I love it. And to be honest, I give a lot of advice for people who want to be marine biologists and get into marine conservation. I feel like volunteering with organizations like Surfrider is a huge benefit, because you learn so much. Like you said, you get training, you get to build this network, you get to do some great things, so it motivates you even more to do even more later on. Plus, it kind of shapes, like, Chad, even you yourself, you didn't do your PhD until, what was it, like 15 years you started ago? Was that when you?
Yeah. I finished in 2012, and I probably started in 2008. But yeah, I'd been a
Right.
Surfrider for a decade before I started it.
Exactly. So it kind of shapes where you think you can impact the world in terms of academically as well as through conservation. So I highly recommend people who are early career scientists looking for experience. It's sometimes right in your backyard. You don't have to go across the world and pay thousands of dollars to get experience for 2 weeks. You can do work and continue that work throughout your career as a volunteer. So I highly recommend that. I'll put that up, the volunteer.surfrider.org, in the show notes and in the description so that people can sign up for that, and fuel your passion more to do more for the ocean and the coastlines and water quality. Chad, thank you so much for joining me. Congratulations on 40 years. Looking forward to another 40, and enjoy the festivities and training and all the wonderful stuff in the next couple of days.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Andrew. It's always a lot of fun, so I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you, Chad, for joining us here once again on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Really appreciate you sharing all the wonderful stories of Surfrider over the last 40 years. Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of Surfrider, a great organization that uses its volunteers as its method to change policy, to create policy, to do so many great things. Sue the government when they're not acting properly, create the Beach Act, just do so many more things. Beach cleanups, getting people involved, listening to volunteers, training volunteers, and building that chapter network to 200 chapters, over 100,000 volunteers worldwide, doing amazing things. And you don't have to be a surfer to be a part of this wonderful organization. And you can also watch them on their website. I'm going to put all the links down in the description below or in the show notes. You can check it out. But follow Surfrider in all the things that they do. They have a lot of different chapters. They care about their volunteers, and they just are a great organization. For the last 40 years, they've done some amazing things, and some of them are too much to count, but they've done some great things from an advocacy role, from a policy role, from an action like beach cleanup and water quality testing role. It's just so many different ways that you can get involved and so many ways that you can watch what they do. And it's such a great opportunity to feel like you're part of a community and not by yourself when you want to do conservation. So think about Surfrider next time you want to do something good for the planet. And I just want to say thanks to Chad for all the work that he's done over the last 29 years, over the last 10 as CEO, and then in the future, all the great work that he's going to be doing with a wonderful staff of 80 people, a wonderful 200 chapters, and amazing 100,000 volunteers and growing. So we want to see that organization grow. Look, they're not paying me to do this. I just think it's such a great opportunity. We don't get these chances a lot to be able to build a network like this, to be a part of a group like this, and to have a voice and to be able to actually affect change. Like, think about mobilizing 2,500 people to a public meeting where the government has to actually change the venue 3 times to accommodate the amount of people. Think about that as one voice, the power of that as one voice. And the big thing here, the big message just in terms of its timeliness, it's almost time to vote in the U.S. If you haven't registered to vote, register to vote today. It doesn't matter who you vote for, but you have power in voting. You want to have that power. You want to be able to vote. You want to be able to have a say for your country. You want to be able to do something, especially if you're part of a democratic society. If you need more information on what the big issues are, you can go to the Surfrider organization website. I'll put in the link below. And also just talk to your local representatives, talk to your state representatives and your federal representatives, and find out where you can vote, how you can vote, and who you can vote for. And do that today. Register today. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It's just amazing to be able to connect with you. If you want to connect with me, you can do so by DMing me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. You can also comment in the description or just down below in the YouTube video. Also, you can watch the video on Spotify and give me a comment there. But I'm always available in any capacity that you just heard. Always looking forward to hearing you, because it's the beginning of a conversation. I'd love to hear your conversation and your conservation efforts. So thank you again for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.